Hello, Endow ladies. Simone here, and I'm with a dear friend of mine, Joshua Stancil, who I have invited on this podcast and YouTube channel to celebrate St. Maximilian Kolbe's feast day and August as the month of friendship. But real briefly, Joshua is the president of Deep River Media, and are you the founder of Dismas Ministry, Joshua?
No, I'm just on the board. I'm just
On the board.
already.
Okay. And he's a writer and he's a really cool guy. So we're gonna talk about that. And he's an introvert too. I'm gonna put that out there, right? He's an introvert. So I'm very, very grateful to him for joining us here at Endow for this interview, because as I mentioned, it's August, the month of friendship, and we both have a love and friendship with St. Maximilian Kolbe, whose feast day is on August 14th. So Joshua, my first encounter with you is actually, and there's a very interesting fact about this man. I met him when I was at the New York encounter and he was still in prison at the time. Wow. Okay. So a little bit of a shock, but there's a very good ending to this story, which we're going to hear about today. But I watched a video, Joshua, that you were in, that you had agreed to do. And you said you were in prison at the time. And you said that for those of us who are watching this, who weren't in prison, that even though we were technically free, that you, being a Christian, was more free than probably a lot of us who were not in prison, by the very simple fact that you understood that you belonged to Jesus. So I'm probably butchering what you actually said and paraphrasing you terribly, but that was my big takeaway, and I was really provoked by that. And so I wanted to invite you to tell your story here to our Endow women and our men, our faithful few men who listen to this, and hear your story and your words of wisdom. So,
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I am, as you said, a bit of an introvert. I worked a long time ago in radio, which was a great job for me, kind of alone in a room in front of a microphone. You can kind of be whatever character you want to be. I'm always a little uncomfortable in front of a camera, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity and I'm very flattered by the invitation.
Thank you.
The video you mentioned, it only happened because I thought it would never happen, which sounds odd, but I'll explain more about how I met these friends in prison. But it was an interview that had been recorded by an Italian man named Marco Bardazzi, who at the time was a journalist for ANSA, which is an Italian news agency. It's kind of the Italian equivalent of the Associated Press. And he was putting together an event or an exhibit for the Rimini meeting. And for anyone, for those who don't know what that is, it's the largest week-long cultural festival in Europe, and it takes place in Rimini, Italy. And they have speakers and exhibits and music, and it's amazing. So he was putting together some sort of exhibit about inmates around the world, and how they maintain their faith and what is their experience. And he said, would you mind if I called the prison and to see if they would allow me to come in and do this interview with you? Well, I immediately said yes, because I thought there's no way the prison is going to approve this. So sure, go ahead, not a problem. And I completely forgot about it. So I don't know, it was like a month or so later, it was the middle of July, and I'd been working a job. I was mowing grass there on the prison grounds. And I get this call to go to the assistant superintendent's office. And immediately I'm thinking, what do they think I've done? Oh, it's like being called to the principal's office.
Yes, exactly. Now what?
Yeah, I'm a dork. I don't do anything wrong. What do they think I've done? And so I'm a nervous wreck.
Just go on.
Yeah. So I'm a nervous wreck the entire way going down to his office. I walk in, he says, "Have a seat." And he picks up this piece of paper, and I'm waiting to hear what I'm being accused of, and he picks up this piece of paper and he says, "Do you know Marco Bardazzi?" And I said, "Marco Bardazzi, yes." And he said, "He wants to do an interview with you. Are you okay with that?" I said, "You would allow it?" He said, "Well, sure, if it's okay with you." I'm like, this is not going the way I thought it was going to go. I thought, But the interview went pretty well, I guess, and the exhibit turned out well, from what I hear. I wasn't able to go, obviously.
It moved me. It was definitely very very provocative for me. Yeah.
But how I met Marco and these other folks, they were members of a Catholic movement called Communion and Liberation, and I'd been locked up about 6 years and had an 18-year sentence. And at first, as odd as it may sound, I was handling it really well, because I thought, for a number of reasons, that the law that I had broken was going to be changed and my sentence would be modified, reduced, and I would go home. About year 6, I realized that's just not the case, and I'm going to be doing 18 years day for day.
Yeah.
And making matters worse, I'm in North Carolina, and the North Carolina prison system moves you around every few years because they're worried about relationships developing between inmates and staff. So I got moved to a really horrendous place. And even though I didn't have any problems there personally, it was just chaos all the time around me, and I just started to crumble. And to be honest, I became suicidal. The only thing that was really keeping me going was I had a subscription to Magnificat, which I'm sure many of your members and viewers are familiar with. Great publication. And they had been sending it to me for free for a couple of years. It was very kind of them. And for those of you who don't have the publication, they have every day the mass readings for every day, morning and evening prayer, and they'll have a meditation of the day by a saint or someone, a prominent figure in the church. And every month there was always some sort of excerpt from this Italian priest, Monsignor Luigi Giussani. I'd never heard of him before. And the little bio down at the bottom of the bottom of the page, it just said that he's an Italian priest and he's the founder of the lay ecclesial movement, Communion and Liberation. Well, I didn't care about any kind of movement. It was not a group.
Who even knows what that means? A lay ecclesial movement.
Yeah. And I started writing different prison ministries and different groups, asking, does this guy, who is this guy? Does he have books in English? And what you discover when you're in prison and you write people outside of prison is they frequently do not write back because they just think it's a scam, or you're going to be asking for money, or
sincere.
Yeah. So I had kind of forgotten about that. So I was sent to this really terrible place, and I'd become suicidal to the point where I was actually, this is going to get maybe a little dark. I apologize in advance, but some prisons in North Carolina are sort of maximum security. You have your own cell. It's very controlled, and self-harm becomes a difficult thing to pull off. But I was in a medium custody facility, which was much less restricted. Everything was very open. The dorm rooms, the bunks, everything's open. The bathrooms are open, and it becomes much more difficult to get away with anything. Right. So I started taking notice of which guards would sleep during their shifts, because they're supposed to make rounds throughout the dorms. And so I was making little notes and just deciding when could I do this. And then I was going through my locker, I was going through some belongings, and I found this. It was a 30-day preparation to make a consecration to Mary, according to the method of St. Maximilian Kolbe, who was my confirmation saint. Now, because I'm a convert, and I can talk more about that later. But I thought, I've got a month until the Feast of the Assumption. This was mid-July. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. This is my one last ditch effort to just, I'm clinging to something, So I did this preparation, and on August 15th, I made this act of consecration. There was no emotion, there were no tears, there was nothing cathartic about this at all. This was just kind of a last
intellectual assent.
Exactly.
You had your conversion to the Catholic Church years before prison, correct?
Right, correct, yeah.
Your confirmation saint was St. Maximilian Kolbe. Okay, right. Then you enter, I think this is incredible. You enter prison, you are suicidal, and this is not an emotional thing. This is an intellectual, if this God thing is real, and this is the proposal being made for me. I'm going to do this consecration.
Because I got nothing left.
There's nothing left. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 12 more years of this to go, and my tank is empty. I got nothing.
Side note, I have donated many a Magnificat of mine to prisons over the years. So all those endowed women who have done the same thing, I think it mattered.
It definitely mattered. It definitely mattered. Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Anyway, side tangent. No need to humble brag there. Back to
that's fantastic. It definitely matters. So I did it. August 15th came and went, and there was nothing immediate, Well, about a week, 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Paulist Prison Ministries out of DC. I had completely forgotten that I had written to them, I guess 6 months earlier or something. And they wrote back, it was a very short letter, and they said, we don't know who this Monsignor Giussani is, or we don't know anything about this movement, but we went online for you, and we found 3 contact email addresses for you of people in the movement, and, have at it. Well, that was very, very kind of them. The problem is, in prison, you don't have access to the internet. So, we're not sending email to people. So what I did was there were 3 names. It was John McCarthy, Barry Stolman, and Rick Kushner. And I just randomly, eeny, meeny, miny, mowed it, picked Rick Kushner. And I wrote a letter, sent it to very brief. Basically, I'm an inmate in this prison. How do I order any books? Are there any books in English? And sent it to my mother, who is not Catholic, and said, could you email this for me? And I did that and forgot about it, because I love my mother to death. Obviously, she's my mother, but you can ask her to do something, and she, in that moment, will be incredibly enthusiastic. Yes, yes, yes. And then she'll just simply forget about it, because, life happens.
Right.
And, but she did send the email. It took her a month or so, but I've always found it very significant, the date on which she sent the email. It would not have been significant for her because she's not Catholic, but she sent the email on October 7th.
Oh, Our Lady of the Rosary.
Exactly. So I just made this act of consecration, and then I find out later that this email was sent on
the Battle of Lepanto, actually.
Exactly.
Our Lady of Victory, based on the Battle of Lepanto.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
So,
that's great. Every Catholic nerd bone in my body is like, yes, Lepanto. Anyway.
Just to jump ahead just a little bit in terms of the dates, I've always found it significant that after that, very significant things in my prison journey happened on days associated with Mary. So the last prison I was sent to on May 13th, Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. Wow. My release date, and this was the big one for me, my release date, which actually had been determined in 1996, at my arrest, basically, was August 22nd, which is the Feast of the Queenship of Mary.
Amazing.
And so that sort of thing. I suppose you can say it's a coincidence.
Mary's looking out for you. It's not a coincidence.
I know
it's providence. We call it God winks in my friend circles, but
God winks. Yeah.
God winks. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We're dorks too, but it's true. I mean,
it's true. Yeah.
It's true. That is amazing. And you just wanted some books because you like the
books.
Meditations. Okay. And this gets you off the suicide track. In the sense you got distracted by it, or how did that?
Yeah, the thing about Giussani, and I recommend, and I'm not here to sell a movement to anyone, but Giussani himself, I think is a saint, and my hope is that one day he'll be declared a doctor of the church. He was just really brilliant. And the thing that I found so appealing to him, and the thing that was so helpful, was that he never and particularly helpful to me as an inmate, someone who had broken the law. He never downplayed the seriousness of sin, but he never stopped at that. He was always adamant about there's something greater than that, and that's ultimately what saves us. And I was in a very moralistic mindset when I got to prison, uh, in part because of how I had initially converted many years prior to prison. And maybe this is a good point to mention that. It was my second year of college. I was at West Carolina University, which is in the mountains of North Carolina. And my roommate that year, it was moving in day, and it was a guy named Richard. And he was a very skinny, red-haired, freckle-faced guy with a terrible stutter. I mean, he would really just kind of lock up, you know. But he was very affable, just a great guy. He was from the mountains himself, and he had this really, if you think I've got a Southern accent, he you know,
Really did.
really, really thick. And so we're sort of unpacking in silence, and he's got a, you know, I've got a suitcase. He comes in with a big army duffel bag, and he's pulling stuff out. And at one point, he pulls out a framed 8x10 glossy of John Wayne from the movie The Green Berets.
Admitted.
Yeah, it puts it on his desk, you know. And so at a certain point, he kind of whirls around and he sticks out his hand, and I shake it. And, you know, he talked like that, man. Hey, how you doing? My name's Richard. I just want you to know, you know, it's a pleasure to meet you. I said, well, thanks. And so he said, I just want you to know what's mine is yours. He said, except for two things.
I was gonna say, except what? What is
Yeah, he said, except for two things. One, don't touch my deodorant.
his deodorant? That's
Yeah.
funny. That's really funny.
And two, don't touch my John Wayne picture.
But everything else is yours for the grab.
Exactly. Yeah. So I never understood that, but you know, I thanked him, told him I was touched. But he was great. He was very, 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 very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, I was too, but he was far more conservative than I was. And this was the fall of 1990, which, if you remember, was there was Operation Desert Shield going on, which eventually in early 91 became Operation Desert Storm. And there were lots of rumors that and concerns that there would be a draft imposed. And he and I, of course, are that age. And so we, lots of stuff on the news. We would stay awake at night, late at night, debating sort of the issues of the day. And whatever position he took, I would just take the opposite to kind of poke at him a little bit, you know. I had stopped being a believer. I'd stopped being a Christian in high school. And but because I'd grown up in the South, I'd kind of absorbed this sort of an anti-Catholic sentiment by osmosis. And so whenever he would lay in, because he was a diehard fundamentalist Protestant, and so he would trash the Catholic Church, and I didn't really have anything to say, any kind of comeback.
Yeah.
So I started going to we had a fantastic university library. So I started going to the library and researching the Catholic Church's history and teachings and whatnot. Initially, just so I would have a response to him, but it seemed after a few months,
you argued your way into the church.
It was kind of a response to me, you know. And so it all kind of came to a head one night. We had gone into Asheville, North Carolina, to see Dances with Wolves, which was the big film.
I remember when that came out. Yep.
And the film let out about 11:30 that night. It was a Friday night, and he was driving, and he said, "Hey, man, before we go back to campus, I want to show you this Catholic church downtown." I said, "You want to show me a Catholic church? I thought you hate the Catholic Church." He said, "Oh, they're all pagans. They're all going to hell, but they know how to build a humdinger of a church, you know." And,
I like the Richard guy.
Yeah, he was great. And so the Basilica of St. Lawrence is a very, very old church built like turn of the century, downtown Asheville. And so we pull up, and he starts to get out of the car. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Inside." I said, "It's open." And even though I'd been studying, I really wasn't aware yet of perpetual Eucharistic adoration, which was going on.
Right.
So he said, "Yeah, it's open all the time." So we went in there, and it was like something out of a movie. You know, it was flickering candles, and they had this huge life-size corpus above the altar. And we were kind of struck silent by it. And then out of the shadows comes this priest in a cassock, who comes over and shakes our hands very vigorously and tells us we need to come back during the day. It's on the list of National Registry of National Historic Sites, stained glass, et cetera, et cetera. And I was so struck by the way he said, "God bless you," because we can just say that like we're saying, "Hi, how you doing?" And it doesn't mean anything. But for this priest, it just really seemed like he was very serious. And then he disappeared into the shadows again. And Richard and I didn't say a word the entire 45-minute ride back to the dorm. It was just a very impactful moment. Richard, sad to say, flunked out after that semester. And so that January, I went back to the Basilica of St. Lawrence and met with Father Carl to start taking instruction, which is what I did.
Oh, wow.
But my Catholicism had been, in some sense, sort of Protestant. In fact, Father Carl had asked me during our first meeting, he said, "Is your girlfriend Catholic?" I said, "No." He said, "Anyone in your family Catholic?" I said, "No." He said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "You don't want me to convert?" He said, "No, that's great. Come on."
Him. I mean, come on, Father.
He said, most people do this because of someone else.
Yeah.
And I think he's right. And what I discovered later, after I got to prison, was that one reason I eventually sort of fell away in terms of practice, I never fell away in terms of intellectual assent.
Right.
I didn't know a single other Catholic. I did everything alone. Went to Mass alone, read the Bible alone.
It's so impressive. I mean, it's really impressive. It was a true conversion in that sense. I mean,
in that sense, but the odd thing was I had everything the church had to offer except the church, basically.
Yeah.
And you always need someone to kind of redirect your gaze, or you can just start going down, which is what I did. I just kind of went down
we're meant to live life in community. Community is yeah.
And the 1 minute before my arrest, I could have explained perfectly the doctrine of the Assumption to you, papal infallibility. Like, I never lost the intellectual assent, but it had no impact on my life, really. That came much later. That actually came in prison. But anyway, all that to say that my experience of Catholicism before prison had been very moralistic. I'd sort of absorbed sort of the Southern fundamentalist atmosphere, which is I had to make it okay for God to love me.
Yeah.
And you do that by not drinking, not smoking, not dancing, not whatever,
Right.
And I was kind of stuck in that mindset. So when I met these friends in prison, in the movement of communion and liberation, that was really the first education that I had, was that they were my friends, not because of something I did for them or something that I abstained from doing.
Right.
That there's something that transcends all that.
Well, and that's, I mean, so that in terms of your story, so you emailed your mom emailed them for you, and then they came to they didn't just send you books, they came to see you.
Yeah, and so Rick had passed my letter on to the email on to an Italian woman who was living in Maryland, Elisabetta Seratoni, who was the head of the CL office, Communion and Liberation, they just call it CL. And so she sent books, but then she wrote me a letter and she said, "Hey, me and a friend are going to be passing through North Carolina in December. Can we come visit you?" And my, first instinct was, no.
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 Why do you want to do that?
I just want to order a book. I don't want entanglements. I don't want connections.
I don't need no do-gooding Christian ladies to come visit.
That's exactly what I thought it was. I thought, okay, we got some hyper intensive
Never listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't need my help. Well, I'm going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the problem is I'm from the South and we're very polite. So we just can't say no.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, sure, fine. And
Southern manners. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So she and a German professor, he's not a professor of German, he's a German professor of philosophy at Catholic University, a guy named Tobias Hoffman. They came down to visit me, and we had a December 29th, 2002. We had a wonderful visit. It started off with a little disconcerting moment. I didn't know what they looked like. They didn't know what I looked like. So I walk in, I sign in at the little desk. I'm looking around. The visitation was held in our cafeteria. And the table right in front of me, that's where they were. And I noticed these two people looking at me very intently. And they just went like through process of elimination. We realized.
So awkward. I just wanted books.
Exactly. So then they realized, so Tobias says in his German accent, "Joshua?" And I said, "Yes." And so Elisabetta comes bounding around the table. She grabs me by the arms and she gives me that, smooch, smooch, kiss on each cheek Italian greeting,
Which is
which
just
frankly,
for a Southern guy. Like, what's going on?
And you don't really get that in prison very often. And so, so it threw me a little bit, but we had a really great visit, and they left. And I thought, well, that was nice. Never see them again. I just thought that they were a couple of really hardcore Catholics doing their corporal work of mercy on some sort of tour of Southern prisons.
Visit the prison. Yeah, exactly.
But then a month later, a couple of other people from the DC area came down to visit. And keep in mind, this is 7 hours one way for them to come down.
Right. Amazing.
And to spend an hour and a half with me in a prison visitation room. And every month, different people would come. And then eventually, every weekend, people were coming from DC and New York to visit.
It's just amazing.
It is.
Really.
And I couldn't figure out what they wanted. I was very, in prison, it just makes you paranoid. You think everyone's after something.
Yeah.
And so I don't have it. They got to know I don't have money. They want my firstborn male child. What's the deal here? What's the angle?
The priesthood.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just a visit, like checking off the charity box.
Right.
They were like getting involved in your life and like caring about you specifically. And I think, am I correct?
No, absolutely. That was at first the most disconcerting thing about it, because my life until that point, even before prison, had been, I was in some sense kind of solitary. I would date, but not seriously. If it got serious,
Yeah.
So
you're
suddenly,
a Ranger, John.
Yeah. So
what are all these people showing up?
Yeah.
People. Amazing.
And I liked them.
And what a stark difference between kind of the moralistic, like Christian, like I need to not do the wrong things or make sure to do the right things to earn God's love. Whereas in this situation, you're completely being loved by God through these people. It's 100% gratuitous. You're literally in prison, so there's nothing that you can do for them.
Yeah.
Here you are being loved. I mean, and you like them. So.
Yeah, and I felt more myself. Like I thought, okay, I think this is what it means to live.
Yeah.
But I'm in a prison. Do you live in I mean, really, can you live?
Can you live in
in a prison, And so I finally met Rick and his wife, Chiara, a woman from Southern Italy, and met their kids. Well, it turns out that Chiara was pregnant again, and they came to visit me. It was December of 2003, and she was very, very pregnant. She was due any day now, and they knew already it was going to be a girl, and they absolutely stunned me by asking me if I would be the godfather of this daughter they were about to have. And what do you say to that? So I was flabbergasted, and I looked at them and I said, I'll never forget it. I said, "You're aware I'm in prison, right?" Just so we're clear, Yeah. Wow. So anyway, that's what they wanted to do, and so she had the daughter. Gabriella was her name and is her name, and they eventually, I guess 4 or 5 months later, brought her for a visit, and we had a picture made during the visit. So there I am in my prison jumpsuit, and I don't have any kids of my own, and I didn't know how to. I'm holding this kid under her arms like a sack of potatoes, just kind of like that for this picture. I don't know what I'm doing, and but your life changes at this point.
It's incredible because you weren't released until years later, right? I mean, from that.
Yeah, when I met them, I still had 12 years to go.
Wow. And I mean, that's like quite a long way to go.
Which is why I almost broke everything off. Like 6 months later, I really was feeling attached, and I thought, they're not going to do this for 12 more years, and let's just cut the cord now. Yeah. It'll be painful, but not as painful as it'll be a year from now or 2 years.
Right.
But I didn't do that, and I'm very glad. And they continued coming for 12 more years.
Wow.
So,
amazing. When did you start to trust that this was a real friendship?
It was, it took over a year. It took over a year. I was still very resistant. I didn't let them know this, but I was still
Yeah.
very resistant.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of keep my actual attachment sort of tamped down so that if,
You're
if, if, it,
guarding your heart, as they say.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
at a certain point, I thought, if I'm honest, I've just got to admit that this is what it is. And I can't keep pretending. So.
Amazing. It's incredible. And it's I think there are probably some endowed women who are listening who feel called to, and probably already are involved in prison ministry. What do you see them in terms of, like, I don't know, would endow studies be possible in prison? I mean, do they allow that? I mean,
They can. Now, obviously I'm a guy, so I can't
right,
speak to what female inmates, to their experience. But I imagine in that sense, it's not any different from it than it is for men. And definitely would encourage endowed women to, if they have an interest and they feel called to this,
yeah,
to contact their local jails or prisons in the area and ask what are the requirements, what is allowed, what is not allowed.
right,
And because everything is different now with COVID, so I don't really know,
right.
but we would have studies sent in and that sort of thing. If you're Catholic, particularly in a southern state, you're the redheaded stepchildren. No one cares. You're not being,
Right.
your interests are not being catered to at all. So there's a huge need for Catholic volunteers and people just willing to write a letter. You don't have to get too involved if you don't feel comfortable with it. It's understandable, but there's just a huge need, really.
Amazing. And well, what I so appreciate about your story is just like the thread of, like, your confirmation, your connection to Saint Maximilian. Even though after your conversion, it's not like you necessarily paid attention to him, but how he kind of, like, took care of you in prison. The consecration, all the Marian Godwinks, this, like,
Yeah.
cultivation of friendship that was, like, I mean, life changing, really. And then your video that you didn't think would get made, me listening to it, being, all the people that your life has affected too. I mean, this is how the body of Christ works. So,
Yeah, with Saint Maximilian, when I took him as my confirmation saint, because as a convert, I didn't have to be rebaptized because I'd been baptized when I was younger in a Methodist church, and that baptism was considered valid. So I took Saint Maximilian simply because I was so moved by his willingness to sacrifice himself for someone else, and I was not particularly struck by the fact, in fact, I don't even think I was even aware that he is a patron of prisoners, among other things,
I
drug
mean,
addicts, that kind of.
right?
And I joke with people that, yeah, if I'd known that, I would have, I picked Saint Maximilian, then I go to prison. I probably should have found the patron saint of lottery winners or something, but no, but in fact, I've got right here, at the risk of being too,
Beautiful.
a former employer made that for me, Saint Maximilian. But yeah, I feel very, very, very close to him. And if I could, just in terms of friendships and providence and how nothing is left to chance. It was maybe a year after I got out. I got out in 2014. So I'm involved in the movement, in the CL movement, and they were having their spiritual exercises in North Carolina at a retreat center in Hickory, North Carolina, which is sort of in the foothills of the mountains. So I had been in one of the prisons I'd been in was one town over. It's a town called Marion. And so I went over early and I drove around. I had never seen the prison from the outside, basically. And so I drove around the parking lot, and I was it was just surreal. I thought I spent 4 of my 18 years inside that prison, and here I am driving around in the parking lot. Well, then I wanted to go to Mass, and I like the old Mass. So I went to this website, sitting there in my car, got my phone out, and I was seeing if there were any traditional Latin masses in the area. And there was one in Marion at the little tiny Catholic church there.
Oh, wow.
And you'll never guess who the pastor of that church is.
I really won't. I really don't know.
Father Carl, the priest I took instruction from when I converted.
Stop it.
When I saw the name,
That's
I thought there's no way. So anyway, I went over to the church. The church was closed. I'd actually missed the mass. And they had a house behind the church, which was the church office. So I walked up and rang the doorbell, and this woman with these huge spectacles cracked open the door, and she said in this very loud whisper, "Are you here to see Father?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I don't have an appointment. He's not expecting me, but if he's around, So she went and she invited me in, and he came down the stairs, and he's an old man now, and has kind of a halting step, gray hair, and I said, "Look, there's no way for me to sort of ease into this. So let me just tell you, I was in prison for 18 years."
Wow.
And his response sort of surprised me. He didn't look shocked or scared, or he just said, "I'm so sorry."
Wow.
And I said, no. I said, the reason I'm here is the thing that got me through prison was my Catholic faith, and you were instrumental in imparting that faith to me back in 1991.
Wow, you just never know. You just never know.
So we had a great little conversation. He was an old school priest. He wasn't going to get emotional or anything, but we were talking about what his life was like now. I was talking about what
crying inside. As we all are listening.
But that was, I cling to moments like that. Moments like that, you realize, people can talk about randomness or it's not random.
It's providence. And you don't even know what he was living in that time. I mean, I don't want to make up things, but I imagine that, and my friend Rob always says this: grace never works in one direction. That you don't know that he needed to see you and hear that from you, because ministry is hard. The priest is very hard. And then now we're praying for our priest every Friday. It's part of one of our things. And he probably needed to hear that from you because of just being encouraged and consoled in the faith and the ministry. So I just love that the Holy Spirit orchestrated all that for you to talk to him and be reunited and thank him and for you to grace his life. So I love me a good God wink story. That's beautiful. I think before we say goodbye, which this has been such a beautiful conversation and everything, I have to tell you, I picked, every Halloween we do our, my inner circle and I would do our All Saints thing, although I'm trying to grow this Saint of the Year thing. And Jen Fulweiler created a Saint Generators, which has made it a whole lot easier. Not that I don't have my jack-o'-lantern full of saint names that anyway. But I had picked St. Maximilian Kolbe October of 2018, and summer of 2019 I got to go to Poland and visit Auschwitz where he was murdered and everything. So St. Max just loves to share his orchestrations and God winks with us, I think, because I just who would have thought that the year that I chose St. Maximilian as my saint, or he that chose me, would be the year that I would be able to go see where he was murdered and all the concentration camps and everything. So yeah.
Well, speaking of St. Max, if maybe we can include this address in the show notes.
Yeah.
But I have a little prison ministry of my own. I'm on the board of directors for Dismiss Ministry, which is a national prison ministry. But I have my own little thing. It's St. Maximilian Kolbe Catholic Prison Ministry.
Absolutely.
And if any of the people watching or listening, if you know someone who's in prison, I'm very happy to write people. And I know from personal experience, frequently chaplains, non-Catholic chaplains don't feel very incentivized to provide a Catholic Bible. They receive all sorts of donations of Protestant Bibles, but I'm very happy to send Bibles or holy cards or just write a letter to try to accompany people through what is
we'll definitely
a very difficult time.
Is that a thing? Just writing letters to inmates? Is that something that is done?
Yeah, you would be shocked at how you know, you don't send money, you can't help them legally, obviously, but just simply a letter. Because mail call in prison is, it's a very public thing. So the officer will walk in, he's got an armload of mail. Everyone, all the guys gather around, and they just call, you know, like, okay, Stancil, they hand you, or, you know,
Wow.
Rizkallah, and they hand you. And I was very struck by this one. He was an older inmate, and this one particular day, neither one of us got mail. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I've been coming out here for 11 years. He said, I've never gotten a piece of mail. And I
Oh,
said,
so heartbreaking.
but he had a smile. I said, well, you don't seem terribly broken up about it. He said, no, he said, because there's always, he said, you know, every day I think today might be the day. And
I'm gonna pray that he's gotten a letter by now. I don't know where he
yeah.
is. Yeah.
But what happens frequently is when you, just very quickly, when you get locked up, if you're lucky, family members write, you get a lot of mail right off the bat. If you're in the county jail or something, once you get sentenced, particularly if you have a very long sentence, the frequency of the letters starts to lessen, and eventually you just don't receive much of anything at all, because people assume you're being taken care of. You know, you're not in danger.
It all by now.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I'm very happy to write people or send the,
so if anybody was listening, and also I'm asking for myself, how do we go about writing people letters?
you can contact chaplains at your local jail or prison and see if there are any Catholic ministries already in the area doing that sort of thing. You can actually work through maybe another prison ministry.
But we can work through your ministry.
Sure, yeah. And that's typically how these things work, or through dismissed ministry or something. That dismissed ministry has materials as well that they send free of charge to inmates, Bibles and whatnot. But this tends to spread by word of mouth. I know someone who's in prison. Would you write to them every so often? So.
Oh, I love that. Okay, we'll have to link to all that. That would be awesome. What a great thing to do. I want to write someone a letter that hasn't got a letter. You know, God loves you. You know.
But I thought that need, but he was very happy about it. Like, he wasn't heartbroken, but he recognized in himself, hey, today might be the day I'm going to walk out there.
Wow, amazing. And wow, okay. So many thoughts right now, but so we kind of have to wrap up. But we didn't actually get too much of a chance, Joshua, to talk about forgiveness and repentance and mercy. And if you wanted to say a few words on that, in terms of coming from your experience of being in prison for 18 years, like, is there something that you would want to say to Christians and to Christians listening? Because I think moralism is a huge temptation. Yeah. And I love what you said about Giussani being a saint, because he always fundamentally understood that there's something greater than all of our sins, all of our crimes, all of our which all of us as sinners merit eternal punishment. And that's not a moralistic thing. That's like a true thing. So, but
yeah, I would just stress to people, there's no contradiction in thinking that the inmate, whether it's me or whomever, right, deserves punishment for whatever they did. We all have to be held accountable. Right. But there's no contradiction between that and wanting to see them reconciled to God, to the church, to society as a whole. Right. And it seems at times even Catholics fall into this trap of just sort of writing people off. Just this morning on Twitter, one of the hashtags I follow is it's a writing community, and this guy said that he retweeted a photo that he tweeted yesterday. It was of him in his garden. He's a middle-aged guy, and he's cutting flowers. And he said, I'm an ex-con. I'm in my garden cutting flowers, and I write romance novels. Is that a problem? And in 24 hours, he lost 10% of his followers on Twitter because he announced that he had, he's an ex-con, he'd been to prison. And you find that attitude, I found that attitude, even among Catholics, and I just think we should know better. It's one of our corporal works of mercy, is visiting the imprisoned.
So unforgiving. We're in such, I've never lived in any other age but my own, but this is a particularly unforgiving one.
Yeah. And so I would just encourage people to recognize the humanity, that we never lose our humanity. We can act in an unhuman way, in an animalistic way, but we're not animals. And that's why we're so shocked when someone acts that way, because that's not what we are.
It's not what we are, but but everybody is capable of, no one is above reproach and above, and I think Scott Hahn said this once in a talk I really liked. He's like, if there's a sin in scripture that, you know, you couldn't imagine yourself committing, well, you just don't understand the sin well enough, because without the mercy of God, I mean, we're all capable of all sorts of terrible things. And it is the Christianity, the essence of Christianity is that while we were, as scriptures say, while we were yet still sinners, God extends his hand of friendship to us and pulls us out. So yeah, that is, Catholics definitely should know better. Hopefully they do,
Well, the idea of true freedom is the ability to say yes to Christ in any moment. And so I'm very, very struck by the example of St. Dismas, the good thief on the cross. Christ was dying, but he spoke to a thief, he spoke to a criminal and promised paradise to him. And the criminal recognized him as well. One criminal did not, the other criminal did. And we can have that same freedom in recognizing Christ in someone who is imprisoned. We can either say, yes, I recognize Christ in you, or we can say no.
Amen. I love it. That's great. There's a really good article actually in Trace's magazine, which is the magazine of CL, that's called, I think, Something Greater. And it came out after the priest sex abuse scandal first came out, when that was first a new thing. And I loved it. I love that article so much. I wish I could find a link to it, because absolutely everybody who commits a crime should be, should pay the price and
sure,
this and all of that. But on a spiritual level, if we're not praying for the rehabilitation, the repentance of ourselves firstly, and then our neighbor, right? In a Christian worldview, in a Christian desire. And St. John Chrysostom said this, like, we should, how cold it is to not care about the salvation of your neighbor. And is a sin too great that we can't find God's love and mercy and forgiveness at the end of it to the one who's seeking his salvation.
Yeah. So. Crime is relational. It's not abstract, and everyone involved comes away hurt and wounded in some way. And the victims, of course, obviously have to be helped in finding healing, and perpetrators of crimes need to be helped in understanding why they did it, and that this can't be the only worthwhile fact about their life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much, Joshua. This was a lovely conversation. And for those listening or watching, happy feast of St. Maximilian Kolbe. And I hope that somebody writes a letter or gets involved in some way, especially those women who I know are called to prison ministry in particular, feel called to that. And is there anything else you want to say before we say goodbye, Joshua?
No, I've gabbed on enough, I think.
Oh, it was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.